I'd like to, at this time, open the hearing for Senate Bill 303. Requires an audit of certain performance assessments conducted in public schools.
Good morning, and thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. For the record, I am Joyce Woodhouse, representing Senate District 5 in Clark County. This morning, I'm pleased to present Senate Bill 303, which requires an audit of our statewide system of student assessments. And since we had the hearing, or when we had the hearing in the Education Committee, some additional information has come forward, and I'm not going to address that. I'm going to let Mr. Daly from NSEA handle that, but I think possibly that may change some of the direction of this piece of legislation. But I think it's important that we set the stage as to why it is important for us to address the issue of student assessments in our schools. And to go right to that, I just want to start with saying that we do an awful lot of testing of our students in our schools here in the state of Nevada. A typical student will take a kindergarten entry assessment, a few early reading assessments, a half a dozen criterion reference tests in English, and another half dozen in math, 3 science CRTs, 4 end-of-course exams, and a college and career readiness test. That's 20 standardized tests in all. A student who struggles with language proficiency could take as many as 9 more. And that's just the tests required by the state and the federal government, not those that the school districts also require. A 2015 report by the Council of Great City Schools found the average American student sits for as many as 112 mandatory standardized tests between kindergarten and high school graduation. So if you get out your calculator, that comes out to almost 9 standardized tests per year per student. The report also found these tests average more than 2 hours to administer. They also require several hours of class time for preparation. It means a typical student spends more than half of a school year on testing during the school career of that student. So we need to take a closer look at what we're doing. When Congress passed the Every Student Succeeds Act in December of 2015, they acknowledged a potential problem with testing in our nation. The law encourages states to improve and streamline the assessment tools and examinations used to monitor the performance of students and schools. It also authorizes the use of federal funds to assist states with an audit, which Congress hopes will assist in realigning the system of assessments with new, more flexible federal requirements. In response to this opportunity, Senate Bill 303 requires the Department of Education to audit our K-12 assessment tools and examinations. It also requires school districts and charter schools to collect and provide information requested by the department to carry out that audit. The bill further requires Nevada's audit plan to meet the necessary prerequisites for receiving the federal grant from the ESSA, through the ESSA. Upon completion of the audit, the department must submit a report of the results to the State Board of Education and to the legislature. Mr. Vice Chair and the committee, when No Child Left Behind Act was enacted in 2001, it began the era of test-based accountability in our nation. It is easy to look back now and be critical of this increased emphasis on testing, but the truth is we probably needed some additional testing. But however, as sometimes happens in public policy, we take a good idea and we take it too far. So every time we wanted to ensure accountability, we required another standardized test. Now these tests have become an impediment to doing the underlying activity that they were intended to measure, and that is the education achievement of our children. The ESSA and the federal funding it makes available will give us an opportunity to step back and reassess our current situation and decide if there is a better way forward. Mr. Vice Chair and committee members, I am well aware of the fiscal note on this measure. It's a hefty one, but I think upon hearing what Mr. Daly has to share, and certainly representatives from the Department of Ed, which I hope we can work together on to bring down this fiscal note, because I do believe it is important that we address this measure. It is an important step in regaining a balance between our need to educate our children and our desire for accountability. We need both of those to be addressed. So with your indulgence, Mr. Vice Chair, I'd like to ask Mr. Daly to present his remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Woodhouse. I'm not seeing any questions, so Mr. Daly, take it away.
Mr. Chairman, Chris Daly, Nevada State Education Association, representing 40,000 educators across the state, working to ensure a high-quality education for every Nevada student. Frustration with student assessments is one of the top, if not the top, complaint that we hear from our members who are in the classroom. NSEA supports SB303, the Time to Teach, Not Test initiative, and we want to give our warmest and most sincere thanks to Senator Woodhouse, not just for sponsoring this bill, but for always championing our public schools. U.S. Code sections 6361 through 6363 outline the process for states to audit their student assessment systems. So this includes, in a potential audit, getting a schedule of assessments, the purpose of each of those assessments, feedback from stakeholders, and then development of a plan that's based on the information gathered, I think as Senator Woodhouse expressed, to quote, to improve and streamline the state assessment system, including eliminating any unnecessary assessments. That's end quote from the United States Code. Last year, the Nevada Department of Education did prepare a schedule of assessments and also conducted focus groups in the 3 regions of the state and surveyed district test directors. The response from this feedback was mixed on district assessments. I would say that it was less than kind to our state's system of statewide assessments. And I'll move to this report. This is the full report of the focus groups that the department had conducted. And I do want to read an excerpt here on page 6 of this document, which involves concerns about the current state assessment system. And keep in mind, this is from the district test directors. The most common concern that participants raised with respect to state assessments was the timeliness of the results. In every focus, this is the focus group, not from the district test directors. I'll get to that next. The most common concern that participants raised with respect to state assessments was the timeliness of results. In every focus group, participants reported that they have not received test results and therefore could not use the results for any purpose. Many participants said they have not received results for multiple years for some tests. Others noted that even when the results are provided, the data come after the school year ends, too late to inform instruction. The lack of results appeared to be a particular area of frustration given the amount of time and energy that went into the testing process. Some participants were under the impression that online administration of the tests would lead to more timely results, and so were disappointed that this was not the case. Participants strongly believed that a key feature of an ideal assessment system would be the timely delivery of results. Participants consistently reported that there were too many state assessments that took too long to administer. Participants in every focus group believed that there were redundancies within the state assessment system that should be eliminated, resulting in fewer tests. They expressed a desire for shorter administration periods for tests. Participants identified a number of ways that assessment negatively impacted the educational system. The most common concern was loss of instructional time. Estimates of the instructional time lost directly to test administration range from 4 days for one set of students to 1 month for all tests in all schools. Participants also noted that instruction is negatively impacted due to pressures to, quote, teach to the test, and imposes time constraints on instruction. Participants identified ways that state assessments indirectly affected instructional time through accommodations made to school schedules. For example, participants reported that their schools had to alter their schedule in the spring, that computer labs would not be available for regular use, and that some schools instructed students to stay home on days they were not being tested to accommodate test administration. Participants were also concerned about the effects on students, noting that the frequency and duration of the state assessment system led to adverse behavioral outcomes. In other words, disengagement in the classroom, not trying hard on tests, test fatigue, missing classes, and adverse psychological outcomes. In other words, test anxiety, stress, malaise, etc. Participants noted a number of logistical concerns about administration of state assessments, including the capacity to administer tests online, in other words, bandwidth issues, equipment, in other words, sufficient number of computers for testing days, scheduling and accommodating restricted testing windows, and preparation for administration. A lack of communication about test administration and lack of support for troubleshooting from the DOE were also noted by participants in the large city category. And this is language from the department's report on the focus groups that they conducted. It came out last July. As I mentioned, the department also conducted a survey of district test directors. And I'll read a briefer passage out of this report, which you can find on the department's website. Of the state-mandated assessments administered, none were identified by the district test directors as being of high value in informing student progress to school or district improvement, in time and cost versus benefit received, in setting clear expectations for students, in measuring and monitoring student progress towards mastery of content standards, in supporting student placement decisions, in providing feedback to students and families, in providing feedback to educators, and providing feedback to community members. None were identified by the district test directors as being of high value in identifying teacher needs, in documenting school or program performance, in providing comparisons across school or district, in providing a common basis for the state's accountability system, in informing instructional practice, program improvement, or program design or delivery. In terms of the scores that you see given, you see a lot of 2s out of 4 in terms of the value of these tests. And this is from the folks at the districts who are responsible with administering these tests at their districts. In terms of responses to open-ended questions asked to the district test directors, the report concludes that a recurring concern in responses is issues with receiving data from end-of-course exams and the Smarter Balanced Summative Assessment, which I'm not reading, but a commentary from the report, which seem to be 2 of the less popular statewide assessments with this group of people, and in the state science assessments. Some respondents lamented that data were received in late summer, too late to inform instructional changes. Other responses indicated never having received any data. In their comments, respondents noted difficulty in using these assessments as a resource tool, given the lack of return data. Respondents also noted that the amount of state testing time detracts from instructional time. One respondent wrote, quote, "The amount of staff time required to prepare, administer, and follow up is of great concern," end quote. Some responses levied criticisms regarding the test design structure of the end-of-course exams and the Nevada alternate assessment. One respondent described the end-of-course exams as, quote, "flawed beyond belief." Some other comments that were given by district test directors, these are quotes: too much summative assessments that doesn't improve or influence instruction. Formative interim assessments would have a greater instructional impact. Another one, from January through May, we are constantly testing the impacts. This impacts and detracts from actual instruction. Or it's frustrating to teachers and administrators not to get results back from the assessments. The amount of staff time required to prepare, administer, and follow up is of great concern. there are too many state assessments. A lot of instructional time is lost. State assessment results are of little use to students and teachers. Quote, we are concerned about the amount of time students spent testing this year, especially the students in grades 10, 5, and 8. The students had a hard time seeing the value in the assessments when they don't get results back. The 10th grade alone spent over 27 hours testing this year. My last one, maybe my favorite, we are using MAP right now in place of the 3-8 assessments because we haven't received results and won't have complete growth results this year. We are completely in the dark with high school. I worry that this survey is not going to be very helpful to you. It's a respondent from a district test director. So in terms of this process last year, we had from the department, the focus groups I mentioned, that survey of district test directors. At the same time, they also had an ESSA implementation process. And I'm not sure over here in finance if you're familiar yet with this draft of the new Nevada plan from the department. But unfortunately, when you read the feedback from stakeholder groups and the district administrators, there seems to be a pretty big disconnect or gulf between what we just heard from that feedback, which is the department's own survey and focus group results, and this document. For example, if you go and read an overview in this document of the Nevada State Assessment System in terms of their description of the Smarter Balanced Assessments or the SBAC, it's written, and I'm reading from this document, the computer adaptive format and online administration of the assessments provides meaningful feedback that teachers and parents can use to help students succeed. That's unfortunately not what we've heard in the department's own feedback from their focus groups and from their survey of district test directors. I did want to acknowledge that in terms of the advisory group recommendations, and I believe a vehicle over on the assembly side, that there is an amendment being made to the end of course exams that NSEA does support to transition the exam away from high stakes graduation requirement to a medium stakes statewide final exam. We support that change, but we think that only scratches the surface. Which brings me back to the fiscal note, if I can find where I left it, in the bill language. So, if you read the bill language, I'd say that NSEA doesn't think that we need a complete do-over here. The feedback from the survey, the feedback from the focus groups is compelling. I'm not sure that we need to redo the focus groups. Perhaps the survey could use an update. But I think what we do need is a plan, as the U.S. Code instructs, that is based on the information gathered, that's based on the feedback from the stakeholders, and it's clear that in this process that's missing. I think that moving forward, it may make sense to have a process that includes the department and perhaps the Legislative Committee on Education to ensure that student assessments are improved and streamlined. NSEA looks forward to continuing our work with the bill sponsor, Senator Woodhouse, and we hope to be able to engage the department on this and moving forward. Thank you very much. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Questions from the committee? Yes, Senator Kiekefer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Daly, I'm sorry. What's new that's going to address the fiscal note? I'm just not. You'd indicated something was new coming out of Congress. I still don't get what's new that's going to change the fiscal note.
So on the note, the department included, the fiscal note from the department. There's some local fiscal notes that are relatively small. But from the department, $143,000 note, and included $43,100 for kind of a do-over of stakeholder groups. I'm not sure that that's necessary to repeat.
You're just talking about utilizing surveys and focus groups that have already been done.
Correct.
Okay.
And so, the survey, I think, perhaps working with the department, maybe not a full resurvey, but maybe an update on that, which hopefully would lower that $53,500 price tag. I'd like to keep all of the money in the plan development,
Sure.
if that's adequate.
Right, so it's not that there's a new reg out of DC or that the grants have become available out of the federal
I
government
do
or
have an
anything like that.
I do have an update from the NEA on that, and for what it's worth, from the United States Congress, we hear that while Congress has yet to finalize appropriations for fiscal year 17, it's expected to do so by the end of the month, or at least according to the NEA folks in the Capitol. Assuming they do so, NEA anticipates funding for the state assessment program. The current draft in the Senate bill has $378 million. The House bill has $300 million. NEA, of course, is working more towards the Senate figure. So the process is that the Education Department must provide each state with a minimum allocation of $1.5 million. Remaining funds after that get distributed to states on a state share of students age 5 through 17. And then there's a process by which a percentage of that is reserved for this auditing purpose of state assessments. My understanding, and we can hear from the superintendent, is that the state did access some of those funds last year. So moving forward, I believe that it would likely be competitive to access those funds moving forward. But there are federal funds out there. I can't say for sure that we'll get them.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Senator Geek. Ever further questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'd like to ask if did you have other persons you wish to have speak?
Yes, Mr. Vice Chair, there are additional individuals to speak in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Woodhouse. Okay, I'd like to ask anyone who wishes to speak in support of SB 303 to please come forward. And if there's anybody in Las Vegas, invite them to come forward as well. Ms. Anderson, good afternoon. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Natha Anderson. I'm the president of the Washoe Education Association, asking for your support of SB 303. I think, thank you again, Senator Woodhouse, for bringing this forward and for also having the hearing here. The time to teach, time to not test is something that I think Mr. Daly and Senator Woodhouse brought forward many of the ideas. I'm just going to say really quickly, as a high school teacher, I never received anything for my students coming in, whether it was freshmen or juniors, especially my sophomores especially. And we would have those tests, but we never received any information about where they were lacking skills in. And I've talked with many of my peers in the lower grades as well, especially in fourth grade, where there's many of the developmental things going on and some of the tests that take place in third grade. They never received anything. And it would help us tremendously to have that information in a timely fashion. Even when the information is brought in the summer, we need to have that to be able to know exactly how to change and adjust our lesson plans to help our students learn. I think the improvement and the development of a plan to improve and streamline the process would help us so much, because we try to teach every child. Many times I get asked, what exactly do you teach? And I say, I teach kids. I happen to teach them the subject of English, but I teach kids. And I think sometimes we forget that, and the test definitely forgets that. I think the other item is that focus group brought up some really important information that the data does not allow for how to help us instruction. The time constraints are a huge issue for us as a high school or middle school and even elementary school. The adjustments in the time, our students are not able to concentrate on what is happening. In May and April is usually when we try to do many of our research projects, simply because that way we've taught them many other skills throughout the year. We're unable to get into the computer lab. And when you teach in a school that is lower income, as the school that I taught in, not having the computer at home, many of my students were in that position. And so then we tried to get into the library. Well, that was also closed because of the students that were being impacted to continue to work on their testing. And so that item of the time constraints definitely comes into our schools. I know that you guys are on a tight timeline, so I'll just kind of end it there, but I will ask for your support of SB 303. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Questions from the committee? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ed Gonzalez with the Clark County Education Association. I'll be brief. This isn't a policy committee, so we do support the bill. we're supportive of the bill, and we also believe the fact that anytime we can eliminate some tests, because the most important thing about this bill is that we know students take a lot of assessment tests. More importantly, we have to figure out what works, what doesn't, what might be unnecessary, and what will duplicate. And more importantly, this fiscal note on here is very minimal. So I think anytime we can regain instructional time, it's important. And as you know, as a money committee, that's a lot more expensive to do than what this fiscal note is. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Okay.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Ruben Murillo, President of the Nevada State Education Association, speaking in support of this bill. It sounds like a lot of the work has already been done, and so hopefully that'll bring down the fiscal note. But then the question is, what do we do next? What do we do with the information that we have? And so hopefully the conversation that begins here, whether the fiscal note goes down or not, is what are the next steps? What do we do with this information that has been accumulated, and how do we plan to address the issue of tests that may be redundant, the issue of not having data available to better direct the education of our students? So we are in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murillo. Questions? Okay, not seeing any. Is there anyone else who would like to speak in support of Senate Bill 303? Okay. Yes, please, Senator Dennis.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment. We used to joke that No Child Left Behind was no child left untested. I know we need to know what's happening with our kids, but at the same time, I think we need them to focus on learning. And so I think it's important to figure out what we do need to do, and get rid of all the other stuff so that we can focus on that. Because every little bit, with all of our kids, every little bit makes a difference. And so I appreciate Senator Woodhouse bringing this forward, and hopefully we can get some great information, as was just mentioned, and that we can do something with that information and not just sit on it. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dennis. Is there anyone who'd like to speak in opposition to Senate Bill 303? Is there anyone who'd like to speak in the neutral position on Senate Bill 303? Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Vice Chair and members of the committee. Thank you. Steve Canbaro, State Superintendent. I'm joined by Deputy Superintendent Barley, who's got some information to share as well. Thank you to Senator Woodhouse for keeping this on our horizon and maintaining a focus on, I think, this critical aspect. And I certainly wouldn't characterize it as doing nothing or sitting on it. The department took the initiative to have a comprehensive audit and review of our assessment system. We have taken a number of steps to find alignment, to find efficiencies in the system, and to push our vendors to turn around the information in a much more expeditious manner. In fact, as you know, we've had some challenges with testing vendors in the past. I think we've got a good vendor to continue to work with here going forward. I'll turn it over to Deputy Superintendent Barley and let him cover a few of the things that we have already done in using this information that we have learned, and some areas that were insightful to us in understanding the interaction between the state, the district, the principal, and the teacher, who all have particular roles in assessments for our youth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Brett Barley for the record. So as Superintendent Canavero said, we did engage in this assessment audit over the past summer. That audit was then used to inform the creation of our Every Student Succeeds Act plan. We did have an assessment work group of stakeholders from across the state come together for multiple meetings to inform the writing of that plan. They reviewed the audit and all the information that was included in it as they made their recommendations. The audit found, and the advisory and the work group for our ESSA plan agreed, that in our K-8 system, our assessment system is quite aligned. In fact, much more aligned than other states, and other states look at Nevada with envy at how we've been able to set up our K-8 system. Where we did find some areas for improvement was around our end-of-course exams at the high school level, and our ESSA plan is responsive to that feedback, and there's a recommendation, and I think it's included in AB7, to take a look at how we're delivering our end-of-course exams at the high school level and considering a change of approach there. A couple of stats for you, just to put on the record. So at the elementary school and the middle school level, we offer the Smarter Balanced Assessment to students in grades 3rd grade through 8th grade. 0.4% of the school year is spent taking that assessment. At the 5th, 8th, and 10th grade level, there's a science assessment. That takes up 0.2% of the school year. At the high school level, we have the end-of-course exams and we have the ACT. The end-of-course exams take up 0.4% of the school year. The ACT takes up 0.4% of the school year. One of the big takeaways I had from the audit was the interplay between state level and local assessments. And the auditors found that while we do have our state assessment system, and it's quite aligned at the K-8 level, there is another layer of assessments taking place in all of our schools that are either recommended or required by the district or by the school site, and it's the totality of those assessments together that creates this weight and this burden that we're hearing about. So as we think about moving forward, helping to figure out that alignment between the state, district, and school site level is where we think we need to spend a lot of time.
Steve Canberra, I'll just add one sort of why this, I think, and I praise Senator Woodhouse for continuing this discussion. And a good example of how we believe we can find efficiencies is really established over the interim when the State Board of Education was required through the enabling legislation of the Read by 3 Grade Act to prescribe an assessment for a reading assessment for students in grades K1 and 2. And that's aligned to the 3rd grade Smarter Balance. We start in 3rd grade, we don't assess. We did this by canvassing the school districts to understand what assessments they're using. So we, rather than add a layer, we asked our school districts, what is it that you are using as an interim assessment to measure literacy or reading comprehension? And once we received that information, the majority of school districts use the measures of academic progress. And so then our task was to ensure that that assessment would align to a 3rd grade, our 3rd grade Smarter Balanced. Could we, in other words, draw a line between a student's 1st or 2nd grade performance and literacy on a district assessment to the 3rd grade Smarter Balanced assessment that's used as a primary screener in 3rd grade, among a number of other tools, but that's the primary. And so ultimately the State Board adopted the map. So rather than add an additional state assessment on top of, we took advantage of high quality assessments being administered across our districts, those which was aligned to our 3rd grade SBAC, as a way to measure fluency or reading comprehension in the early years without adding additional assessment. So just an example of the attention I believe that we're paying to this issue. And we could certainly, would love to explore this further. And as we discuss the fiscal note, we'll work with Senator Woodhouse. The fiscal note that we provided, we essentially asked the individual who provided the initial audit to read the bill and provide us a mock-up as what it would cost as written in the bill. So that's how we arrived at that fiscal note. Thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, sir, for that explanation. Questions from the committee? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Thank you once again. Thank you. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak in the neutral position on Senate Bill 303? I guess not. Senator Woodhouse, concluding remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair and committee members. Joyce Woodhouse for the record. In summary, I just want to bring this back to our students in our classrooms. 3 points in conclusion. 1, the instructional time. Our students need the highest number of minutes and hours and days on those subjects that they are studying in their classrooms. Secondly, teachers must have data in a timely manner in order for them to utilize that data to make their instruction better and reach those students in the areas where they're struggling. And third, and this is probably one of the really tough parts, the stress that we put on our students when they have to go through many of these tests. And I just, as I was sitting here, a situation that happened in my classroom, I thought, I'm just going to tell you all about it. It was my last year of teaching, and I was teaching second grade, had 19 students. First time I ever had 19 students. The rest of the time it was 34. But it was the end of the school year, and we were taking the CRT reading test, which wasn't, in my book, wasn't hard because we had, it was what we were doing all year long. And my students were well underway, about halfway through the exam, and all of a sudden, one little girl just totally broke down and just sobbing. And all I could do, and of course you can imagine what that did to the other 18 students. So I went over to her and tried to find out what was wrong. And she said to me, through her sobs, she said, my mom and dad want me to be perfect. I have to get 100%. And she said, you want me to be perfect. Oh, that was a dagger to my heart. All I could do then was just probably something that in these days you're not supposed to do, but I took her in my arms and held her and wiped away her tears. At lunchtime, I called her mom and dad and told them what happened. They came over to the school, and by the end of the day, she was fine again, but this was a young lady, not 7 years old. She'd always had perfect scores on everything. She was very well, certainly a perfect second grader, but to have someone that young just totally fall apart with the pressure of an exam, and then it is something that we expect of our kids. And so I think we have to just always remember that the important thing is we look at the testing situation in its totality. What is it doing to instruction, what it is doing to our teachers, and what it, most importantly, is doing to our kids. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Woodhouse. Appreciate that. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and close the hearing on Senate Bill 303, and I'll return the gavel to the chairwoman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And at this point, we have a bill draft request to address. So I will read it. The chair has been notified by the governor's finance office of a request for a general fund appropriation, which was not included in the governor's recommended budget transmitted on January 17th, 2017. The appropriation request includes a request for a general fund appropriation of $1,680,000 to cover emergency responses to the 2017 flood events that occurred in January and February. And could I have a motion to move this bill draft request? A motion from Senator Ford, seconded from Senator Kiefer. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And we'll now go to public comment. Do I have anyone who wishes to address the committee under public comment in Las Vegas or here in Carson City? Seeing no one, this meeting is adjourned.